Hello friends, I am Professor Smita Jha from the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, and I am here to discuss research methodology. We all know that research methodology is a crucial subject, you can say area of research, to know the various steps in pursuing research. So today's topic is what is a thesis statement, and you know that all discussions, argument depends on this thesis statement. So let us discuss thesis statement. So a thesis statement comprises one or two declarative sentences that summarize the main point of a paper or a piece of writing, such as an essay. A thesis statement identifies the topic to be discussed and the purpose of the paper itself. Most importantly, a thesis statement makes an assertion and communicates the author's position on the topic to the reader. It is also important to note that the thesis statement is derived from the structure of research proposal, as it encapsulates the central idea that the researcher aims to prove or explore throughout the research activity. So, a thesis statement in essence is a sentence that summarizes the main concept an author's wishes to investigate in their research. A thesis statement is often question hypothesis the authors want to address using a certain methodology or approach to provide sufficient evidence to support their claims and findings. However, it is not necessarily the topic sentence, first sentence in a research paper introduction, which could be a general statement. So, it is basically a sentence or two that summarizes the central theme of your research. In research paper and essays, it is typically placed at the end of the introduction section, which provides broad knowledge about the investigation study. To put it simply, the thesis statement can be thought of as the main message of any film, which is communicated through the plot and characters. Similar to how a director has a vision, the authors in this case has an opinion on the subject that they wish to portray in their research report. Now that we have understood the concept, the next step is learning how to write a good thesis statement. A strong thesis statement should let the reader understand how well versed you are as an author in the subject matter of the study and your position on the topic at hand. The elements listed should be considered while crafting a statement for your thesis or paper to increase its credibility and impact. The author should take a position that a sizable portion of the readership may disagree with. The subject should not be a well-known, well-defined issue with just unanimity of view. This form of thesis statement is typically viewed as weak because it implies that there is nothing substantial to investigate and demonstrate. To pique readers' interest, the thesis statement should be debatable in some way, and the findings should advance the body of knowledge. A review of pertinent literature on the subject is a must in order for the author to establish an informed opinion about the questions they wish to pose and the stance they would want to take during their study. This is the basis to develop a strong thesis statement. The authors of the study should be able to support their statements with relevant research, strengthening their stance by citing literature. Now, a research project thesis statement works similarly to the research hypothesis in the sense that both address the research question. However, the thesis statement and research hypothesis serve different functions. The thesis statement is a short, direct statement that summarizes the main point or argument of a research paper, thesis paper study, or academic essay. This statement can be seen in quantitative, qualitative, and mixed research methods. Meanwhile, a research hypothesis is a statement that can be proved or refuted based on the results of the study's research design. It is more commonly used in experimental research. Depending on research methodologies and the types of research design, the hypothesis proposes or predicts a relationship between two or more variables. Based on the consideration, you may wonder how to write a thesis statement for different types of academic essays. Expository and argumentative essays, the most common types of essays, both call for a statement that takes a stand on the issue and uses powerful language. These kinds of thesis statements need to be precise and contain enough background material to give a comprehensive picture of the subject. However, in persuasive essays, which typically integrate an emotive perspective and personal experiences, the opinion are presented as facts that need supporting evidence. The sole difference between argumentative and expository essays and persuasive essays is that the former require the use of strong viewpoints while the latter does not. Last but not the least, the thesis statement for a compare and contrast essay addresses two themes rather than just one. Authors can choose to concentrate more on examining similarities or differences depending on the nature of their study. The only caveat is that both topics must receive equal attention to prevent biases. Now, the question is how to write a thesis statement. Generally, there are 4 steps. There are various steps, but measure 4 steps. Coming up with a research question might be challenging in situation when the research topic is not decided or it is a new field of a study. You may want to delve deeper into a widely researched subject, continue with your current research, or pursue a topic you are passionate about. If you don't have a thesis statement yet, there are 4 steps that you can follow. Now, first, start with a working thesis statement. Writing the statement is not so straightforward. You won't magically write the final thesis statement at once. It is preferable to choose an initial working thesis after reviewing relevant literature on the topic. Once you have chosen a subject that interests you, attempt to think of a specific query that has not been raised or that would be fascinating to contribute to the body of literature. Now, for example, if you are writing an article or paper about ChatGPT, you could want to look into how GPT affects learning among students. You can even get more specific, like how does ChatGPT harm learning and education. Now, the second steps can be outline your answer, your positioning on the subject. Based on your review of past research, you would form an opinion about the subject. Now, in this example, the effect of ChatGPT on students' learning, and then you write down your tentative answer to this question. If your initial response is that ChatGPT use has a detrimental impact on education and learning, this would serve as the foundation for your research. Your study would include research and findings to support this assertion and persuade the reader to accept your hypothesis. Third, provide evidence to support your claim. The goal of your study should be to back your hypothesis with enough evidence, relevant facts, and literature to support your claim and explain why you selected that particular response. Now, in this case, why you believe that ChatGPT hurts learning and education. The focus should be on discussing both the benefits and drawbacks of using ChatGPT and demonstrating why the disadvantages outweigh the benefits. An argumentative thesis statement example on the same topic would be that despite ChatGPT's enormous potential as a virtual learning tool for a student, it has a detrimental effect on their creative and critical thinking skills. Fourth, polish your thesis statement. After outlining your initial statement, improve it by keeping these 3 elements in mind. First, does it make it clear what position you hold on the subject? Second, does it effectively connect the various facets of the study topic together? And third, does it summarize the key points of your narrative? So, the thesis statement will also gain from your comment on the approach you will employ to validate your claim. For example, the aforementioned thesis statement may be clarified as, although ChatGPT has enormous potential to serve as a virtual tutor for students and assistant to instructors, its disadvantages such as plagiarism and the creation of false information currently outweigh the advantages. This particular illustration offers a thoughtful discussion of the subject, enabling the author to make their case more persuasively. Now, how to generate a thesis statement? No matter how complicated any thesis or paper may be explained in 1 or 2 sentences, just identify the question your research aims to answer, then write a statement based on your anticipated response. An effective thesis statement will have these characters. First, it should have a take on the subject which its contention adds to existing knowledge. Second, it should express a main topic. Other themes should only be included if they connect to the main theme. It should declare your conclusion about the issue, and finally, it should be based on an objective, broad outlook on the subject. To understand how to write a thesis statement from scratch, let us use an example where you may want to learn about how mental and physical health are related. Since the subject is still broad, you should first conduct a brainstorming session to acquire further thoughts. After reading literature, you determine that you are curious to learn how yoga enhances mental health. To develop a compelling thesis statement, you must further narrow this topic by posing precise questions that you can answer through your research. You can ask, how does yoga affect mental health? What is the possible mean? This topic makes it plain to the reader what the study is about, but it is necessary for you to adopt a position on the issue. Upon further deliberation, the premise can be rephrased as yoga, a low-impact form of exercise, positively impacts people's mental health by lowering stress hormones and elevating healthy brain chemicals. Now, this clearly states your position on the topic. Finally, you may further develop this into a clear, precise thesis statement that asks, does practicing yoga induce feel-good hormones and lower the stress hormone, cortisol, that positively affects people's mental health? To turn it into a study. Now, there are various types of thesis statement. So, basically the 3 primary categories of thesis statement are analytical, expository and argumentative. Now, you choose one over the other depending on the subject matter of your research or essay. In argumentative thesis statement, the author takes a clear stand and strives to persuade the reader to their claims. For example, animal agriculture is the biggest driver of the climate change. It is a specific, concise and also contentious. On the other hand, the purpose of an expository thesis statement is to interpret, assess and discuss various facets of a subject. Frequently asked questions. So, these are the facts. So, what is a thesis statement? People try to understand, and as we discussed earlier also, that it can be defined as a sentence that describes the main idea of research or thesis to inform the reader of the argument and research will pursue and the reason the author adopts a specific stance on the subject. Essentially, it expresses the author's judgment or opinion based on a review of the literature or personal research experience. So, why thesis statement is needed? Further important query. Any academic essay or research piece must have a thesis statement since it directs the research and attracts the reader's attention to the main idea of the subject under discussion. In addition to confining the author to a specific subject so they don't veer off topic, it also enables the reader to understand the topic at hand and what to expect. So, how can I make thesis statement? To create an impactful thesis statement, simply follow some 4 steps. Now, Start by creating a working statement by posing the question that your research or thesis will attempt to answer. Then outline your initial response and choose your position on the matter. Next, try to substantiate your claim, what facts or other relevant information, and finally, hone your final thesis statement by crafting a cogent narrative using knowledge gained in the previous steps. Now, where is the thesis statement located in an essay or research? Ideally, the thesis statement should be placed at the end of an introduction of the paper or essay, but keep in mind that it is different from the topic sentence, which is more general. Now, your thesis statement is placed in the introduction after an opening sentence, identifying a problem and giving a background. Following the thesis statement, you outline what is to come in the essay. By having the outline after the thesis statement, you can use it to support your claim. However, some disciplines prefer the thesis statement to be at the end of the introduction. How do you write a thesis statement? Begin by highlighting the keyword in the essay question and brainstorming ideas and views. Ask yourself, what is the main point I want to make? Write your position in plain English. Keep rewriting until it has a strong academic tone and clear perspective. Ask yourself, is the evidence I have provided strong enough to convince the reader of my point? It is good to start with a provisional thesis statement and then refine it once you have written more of your essay and built your argument. However, you should always have a clear position before you begin writing. Your thesis statement will evolve as you read more sources and gain new insights, gather more evidence, analyze and brainstorm ideas, critique and write and edit and proofread. Now, common mistakes to avoid when writing a thesis statement. Crafting a strong thesis statement is the key to guiding your paper, but many students make common mistakes that weaken its impact. Now, what were those common points? First, being too vague. A thesis statement should be specific and clear. Avoid broad or general statements like pollution is bad for the environment. Instead, focus on a clear stance and as reducing carbon emissions through the renewable energy source is essential to combat climate change. Next, including too many ideas. A thesis should focus on one main idea. Avoid multiple ideas into a single statement. This leads to confusion and weakens your argument. Third, lacking arguability. A thesis should present a claim that others can dispute. Statements that are purely factual or universally accepted do not create a space for analysis of argument. Next, making it too long. Keep your thesis concise. Long, complicated sentences can be difficult to follow. A good rule of thumb is to keep your thesis to 1 or 2 sentences. What makes a strong thesis statement? It is not enough to know how to write a thesis statement. You also have to make sure that your thesis statement is strong, clear, and even to some more degree convincing. There are several qualities that indicate the strength and soundness of a thesis statement. A strong thesis statement is original and novel. Generic or formulaic thesis statement should be avoided if only to ensure that you sustain the reader's interest throughout the study or research. Your thesis statement should be constructed or that it reflects your original ideas. Moreover, a strong thesis statement presents original or new aspects of the topic or shed light on novel arguments. One way to ensure the originality of the key points summarized in a thesis statement is to do thorough research on the topic you are interested in. A strong thesis statement is clear and specific. Thesis statements should be constructed so that they are specific and direct to the point. Your thesis message should be clear enough to remove any ambiguity about the purpose of the study or paper. The thesis statement should also clearly state your main argument or your stand on the issue your research discusses. This way, a reader understands exactly what you mean when they read your thesis statement. Furthermore, thesis statement should provide a specific or focused argument that you can prove within the scope and boundaries of your research. By making sure that the thesis statement is clear and specific, you can avoid misunderstanding on the reader's part. Should you want a more concrete idea on this, you may take a look at this scope of work template. Aside from being clear and specific, a thesis statement must be coherent. This is particularly true for these that are more than a sentence long. All the parts of a thesis statement should add up to one coherent thought or argument, and this argument should relate to the rest of your study or research. A strong thesis statement is contentious. An important factor to keep in mind when creating a thesis statement is that a thesis statement needs to be contentious or debatable. Thesis statements are not simple statements of fact. They make an argument or an assertion about a topic. A strong thesis are claims that need to be supported by evidence and analysis. One way to test if a thesis statement is strong or valid is to see if you can come up with a counter argument to your own thesis statement. As a stated thesis statement with no corresponding counter argument may merely be a statement of fact. Once you have narrowed your research question, you should then test your research question to determine if it is narrow enough by beginning to research your specific topic. If when you search for the information, you are getting many results that don't address your specific question, then you should first double check that you are searching using the correct keywords and Boolean operators. Second, if you are searching using the correct methods and are still getting too many results, then you will need to narrow your research question even more. Many qualitative research see a question or a beginning point for the research. Once a satisfactory question is in place, a study can begin. A research question does fulfill this function, but I propose here that much more is involved in creating and using research question in qualitative studies. The reflective and interrogative processes required for developing research questions can give shape and direction to a study in ways that are often underestimated. Now, good questions do not necessarily produce good research, but poorly conceived or constructed questions will likely create problems that affect all subsequent stages of a study. Ultimately, the quality of the initial questions impacts whether or not a study is approved by a dissertation committee, published, or funded. Now, this talk or this lecture addresses both the development of initial research question and how the processes of generating and refining question are critical to the shaping all phases of a qualitative study, the inquiry process. The idea of qualitative inquiry as a reflective process underscores the strengths of a qualitative approach. At the heart of this approach are methods for representing what Gertz called the microscopic details of the social and cultural aspects of individuals' lives. He described the central task of the ethnographer in his well-known discussion on the myriad interpretation of a human wink. He noted that it is not enough to describe a wink and label it as a behavior. Rather, the thing to ask about human behavior is what their import is. The researcher's credibility rests, according to Gertz, on the specifics of place and people who inhabit that place at a given moment, an issue addressed by Maxwell, Patron, and others. Thus, the researcher's worth is characterized by the degree to which he is able to clarify what goes on in such places to reduce the puzzlement. What manner of men are these? Qualitative inquiries involve asking the kinds of questions that focus on the why and how of human interactions. Qualitative research questions then need to articulate what a researcher wants to know about the intentions and perspectives of those involved in social interactions. Strauss noted that the tradition from which qualitative inquiry sprang placed social interaction and social processes at the center of this approach. He highlighted the purpose for qualitative inquiry by the Department of Sociology at the University of Chicago, which from its inception emphasized the necessity for grasping the actors' viewpoints for understanding interaction, process, and social change. Good qualitative questions are usually developed or refined in all stages of a reflexive and interactive inquiry journey. It is noted that reflecting on and reformulating the research question are central points of reference for assessing the appropriateness of the decision you take at several points. To extend the journey metaphor, it is helpful to think of research question as navigational tools that can help a researcher map possible directions, but also to inquire about the unexpected. Good question can grow out of initial curiosity or ideas for a qualitative study, but at the earliest stages, most questions are rough draft. Genesics suggests beginning with a self question, what do I want to know in this study? Even those using grounded theory have some broad questions after entering a potential research site. Chalmers suggests that broad questions such as what going on here, what are the basic social processes, and what are the basic social psychological processes can serve to help a researcher find some initial focus. Maxwell called those early questions provisional, but noted that even these early iteration are already determining decisions about theory and methods. These initial questions can be conceptualized as generative. They may invite a series of more specific questions that help to create the focus needed to move forward with data collection. Most qualitative researchers need a specific question for a proposal. Creating one or two broad questions can be fertile a starting point for thinking through the specific of what their study is about and what data will need to be collected. Maxwell observed that precisely framed research question can point you to specific areas of theory that you can use as modules in developing an understanding of what is going on and suggest ways to do the study. For example, a researcher in the field of social welfare might want to know if child welfare workers suffer from secondary post-traumatic stress as a result of their work with neglected or abused children. An initial question might be simply framed, do child welfare workers suffer from secondary post-traumatic stress? This broad question is already giving some focus to the study and is clearly relevant to the field of social welfare. However, the phrasing of this question is problematic as it could be answered with a yes or no and does not suggest a qualitative approach. Good qualitative questions should invite a process of exploration and discovery, as Creswell suggests. Maxwell also cautioned that starting with questions that are too focused can lead to tunnel vision and can inhibit a researcher's understanding and analysis. Creating discovery-oriented questions can help a researcher use the process of developing and refining questions as a basis for a more rigorous and reflexive inquiry. Creating an overarching question to guide the inquiry process. Developing an overarching question, as Jensic did, has advantages for the researcher. A broadly framed question can serve as a basis for initial and emerging sub-questions. A single overarching question allows a researcher to capture the basis. Goals of their study in one major question. A clearly stated overarching question can give direction for their study, design, and collection of data and offer the potential for developing new, more specific questions during data collections and analysis. Now, theory is inextricably linked to research question, whether the theory is shaping them initially or is suggesting new question as their study unfolds. An overarching question and many qualitative studies will point toward one or more of the theoretical constructs that frame the study. As Maxwell explained, research questions need to account for one's tentative theories about phenomena. Those tentative theories and the questions that result from them may very well change to accommodate data collections or preliminary findings. Often, when doctoral students write a proposal, they are drawn to grand theories as a beginning point. For example, a researcher may be drawn to social justice issues and therefore choose a critical theory framework writ large in the initial stages. As the design develops, the researcher may decide to focus on questions about a particular aspect of a social context, such as social interactions. At this point, the theory might be narrowed to discourse analysis, and research questions about discourse and the positioning of individual in a discourse would follow. Theoretical framing evolves and changes during most studies and may also inspire additional questions as a researcher collects data. Karpiak, for example, had begun her study of middle-aged social worker with three questions. What happened to these professionals in their work, their personal relationship, and their sense of self during the midlife transition? How do they manage the changes and transitions during this period? Finally, for those for whom the period has ushered in major changes, what events triggered them? After she was immersed in collecting her data, she found chaos theory revealed other dimensions of the participants, life changes that she had not originally considered. Through the lens of this theory, I could see the possibilities for human evolution that may follow from disorder, turbulence, chaos, and crisis. Turn to chaos theory helped generate new questions on how middle-aged people handle life situations beyond their control. Another important issue when writing question is to be sure that they are answerable. Can they be answered by any kind of a study? A former student with a background in library science was doing a small study for a class project and came up with an initial question that asked, how do college students feel about their campus library? Of course, he had no intention of interviewing all college students in the world. In our conversation about his proposal, he said he was especially interested in undergraduate students' views and specific services provided by the library. There are many practical considerations to think about when writing questions. Some questions are simply not answerable given the researcher's time frame and resources. When writing questions, a novice research may not take into account the cost of travel, copying, transcription, and all the time materials required. Richard lists three questions to ask in developing research question. What are you doing? How are you asking it? And what data will you need to provide good answer? Her third question is practically important. As noted, writing a qualitative research question, it is usually important not to phrase it so that it leads or contains a presupposition about participants or events. In qualitative research, in particular, the researcher is trying to discover meaning throughout the inquiry process. However, there are theoretical positions as well as qualitative approaches that work from a set of assumptions or a worldview such that research questions contain those implicit or explicit views. Critical theories often begin by assuming unequal power relationship exists, and those assumptions may shape question. Good qualitative question can be significant tools that shape is study design and analysis. Although initial questions often emerge from a researcher's passion and interest in particular topics, ultimately the goal is to refine and possibly expand the inquiry through reflexive, iterative, and dialogic processes that are central to the theoretical and ethical positions taken up by the researcher. During the inquiry process, a researcher needs to see question as tools for discovery as well as tools for clarity and focus. In the end, good qualitative questions are dynamic and multidirectional, drawing the reader into the research with a focus on topic of significance and at the same time functioning as lenses that are directed outward by the researcher to capture the nuances of the lives, experiences and perspectives of others. With this, I wrap up the discussion. Let us meet in other discussion regarding the research methodology. Till then, thank you.